All right, welcome to the next lesson. The last lesson we were talking about the beginning of the Zhou dynasty, the western and eastern periods of the Zhou dynasty. Now, with that, I kind of browsed over it a little bit, but I hope you got the idea. The Western Zhou period is basically this good time period. Things were done well, even though it was basically a weak form of government and with the feudal style of government they had. They were doing well until they got to the whole story that I went over when we were talking about how, or when I was explaining how the child emperor just rang the gong too many times. Now, then we got to the Eastern Zhou period, and the basic idea of the Eastern Zhou period is everybody believes that the Zhou family's lost the mandate of heaven, but no one is willing just to be the first person to go out there and just say, I'm going to try and I'm going to try and stop this, or that, not stop it. I'm going to be the one that tries to obtain the mandate of heaven or show that I have it and that the Zhou family doesn't. But realistically speaking, whoever did that first, everybody else is going to jump on. So 200 years goes by and everybody's like, okay, it's just time to have it all out. So that's what moves us into the Warring States period. And if you did the Bellwork question at the beginning of class, one of the questions I asked you were questions based around the idea of happiness. What makes you happy? Like, those simple things like coming home and all of a sudden, your mom cooked you your favorite meal and you just get really happy inside because you weren't expecting that. A nice note from someone like that, or you really look forward to like a movie coming out or a new album coming out or a video game coming out, something along those lines, just something that you just look forward to, the hope and joy it gives you, something simple, also like the great things, your family and whatnot. What makes you happy? Then the other two questions I asked you were questions on the idea of just, well, what are the key elements to happy living? Can I identify that? Through all those specific things you came up with for question one, then what can you identify things that tie those together? Why? What is that thing that ties them all together that essentially is that happiness? Then the third question I asked you is, then if you can identify that, can you then identify what is the cause or what are the causes of unhappiness? And a lot of this is just opinionated. You could have, there are entire classes devoted just to this question. Heck, people have devoted their entire lives over the course of history. Many people have done this to essentially discover what is happiness. The Chinese are one of the main societies that really has, every society has, but we're going to be focusing on this with China. With China, they're probably the best ones to look at when we look at this question. What is happiness? How do we get a society that gives us the most happiness possible? So, thus we come to the Warring States period. In the Warring States period, basically everybody just said, all right, we're done with this waiting game. Let's just have it out. Now, the picture I have there of the Warring States period on the side, that shows you like the final stages of it in the last decade or two of the Warring States period, where it's narrowed down to 7 major states. It started with around 50 some odd states. I believe it's 52 different warring factions in the very beginning that whittled down pretty quick in the very beginning. It whittled down to 30 some odd, then it whittled down to 13, and it stayed at 13 for a little while, and then it whittled down to 7. But this whole course of idea lasted 200 years. Remember we talked about the Egyptian Civil War and how bad that was for the 120, 130 odd years that it lasted. We look at this, and this is considered much worse. I referenced this a little bit last time with the Egyptian Civil War. I want to say last time we talked about a civil war. But I'm going to hit this a little bit harder here. It's almost impossible to be happy at this time. There's such a fear within the people of what's going to happen to you, what life is going to look like from one day to the next. You don't see the light at the end of the tunnel type thing. That it's almost impossible to be happy. And when this lasts for generations, you have people growing up and dying without the knowledge or the feeling of safety which you need in order to be happy. Oh, by the way, I should have referenced this a little bit earlier. I need to reference it right now because it's important to put in place before we get into the rest of this lesson on the Warring States period and the Age of Sages, basically Chinese philosophies. And that is, I like to put up everybody's ideas of the key elements of happy living up on the board, and then we kind of vote on it, on what everybody, the majority of people think are like the main reasonings. But when it comes down to it, there are 2 major things that you need to have in place in order to be happy. Doesn't mean if you have both of these you're going to be happy, but they're foundational, meaning that in order to be happy these 2 things need to be in place. The first one I've actually referenced a few times now in just the last couple minutes. Safety and security, feeling safe. It is impossible to feel happy unless you have a sense of safety and security to you, that you know everything is going to be okay. Without that, it is just massive fear and anxiety in whatever situation it is. Now, just because you may be safe, though, doesn't mean you're going to be happy. And everybody knows that. You can be physically safe, but you might not be happy necessarily in whatever given circumstance. Think back to how many times you might have argued with your parents about something. You're just so unhappy that they're forcing you to do something or keeping you from doing something, which brings us to, by the way, you're perfectly safe. For most people, you're perfectly safe in your parents' home. At least I hope that's the case. Physically safe, that is, and emotionally. But that gets into the second one. The second major thing is actually personal choice. That's what I was kind of referencing. If you ever get mad at your parents about keeping you from doing something you want, or why can't you make decisions for yourself, well, that's it right there. We like to have that control. We like to have that power, that freedom of choice to really be in control of our lives. And when we make a bad decision and we're unhappy because of that, we're more accepting of it because we realize it was our fault. Basically, those are the two big ones: safety and security, personal choice. I could talk a lot more on that one. I hope I've explained this well enough so far. But it's impossible to be truly happy without both of those. But it doesn't mean you will be happy with both of those. It just doesn't. But in order to have true happiness, you need to have both of those in effect, or feel like you have both of those in effect. So that's something we'll get into a little bit more a little later. But I like pointing that out because, well, we've seen so many examples of that through history, and we're going to go through some today in this lesson. So, getting back to the Warring States period, you basically have neither here. Yeah, you have a few people in control that are feeling like they're doing good. They always even have that fear themselves that at some point they might get taken over by another state. But the people, the general people throughout China, not a good feeling. You don't know when an army is going to come through, take all your food, conscript your sons, conscript you, do stuff to your wives, take your daughters, take all your food so you starve and die. It's just bad times. Of course, there were probably some people here and there that felt safer than others, maybe had an opportunity to be a little more happy than others, but you just didn't have, it wasn't fully on the horizon, and everybody knew it. That's why we also call this time period, I should have had that up, that part, with constant warfare, majority of people felt like they were in constant fear. That's basically what I'm explaining here. But that's why we get this next part, where it says, therefore this period is also known as the Age of Sages, as many tried to philosophize how to be happy again. Just think about that for a second. They philosophize on how to be happy because they realize they don't know how to be happy any longer. They read about it from the past. They read about it during the Western and Eastern Zhou period, even during the Zhao and Shang dynasties, that there was this element of safety and security and happiness to it. But they forgot. So a lot of people started coming out saying, just, I know what happiness is. Follow what I have and we will be happy again. We will have good lives again. There's lots of people that come out and say stuff. Not a few, a lot of people that do this. And that's what we're going to get into right now, because a few of these people really make their mark on China and arguably the rest of the world in some cases with the philosophies that they come up with. Here are the three big ones. First off, you have a guy named Confucius. Imagine you've heard that name before. Comes up with a philosophy called Confucianism. Then a guy named Confucius, I think I'm saying that right, comes up with a philosophy called legalism. That was actually one that we understand that one quite well. I'll explain why when we get to that the part of the lesson on that. Then you have a guy named Lao Tzu. Again, I think I'm saying that name right. He comes up with Taoism. By the way, Taoism spelled with a D or a T, same thing. Just it's spelled both ways. It's the same thing. Now, here are some quotes to go along with it. So here's a Confucian quote. Everything has its beauty, but not everyone sees it. Here is a legalist quote. When the wise man rules the state, he does not count on people doing good of themselves, but employs such measures as will keep them from doing any evil. And the last one, the more laws and order, or this is a Taoist quote, the more laws and order are made prominent, the more thieves and robbers there will be. So, I imagine you're kind of looking at those and like, well, maybe I understand a little bit, or that doesn't make as much sense to me, especially the third one. It seemed like just happy-go-lucky sayings. But here's the basic ideas. Oh, man, if a Confucianist or a legalist, and especially a Taoist, heard what I'm about to tell you, they would not be happy. But I'm trying to generalize and summarize this as best you can to give you an inkling of the basic idea of each of these three. Confucianism, simply put, is based on the idea that everybody is born good, meaning that you are inherently a good person, a good moral person. Legalism is the exact opposite. Legalism is based on the idea that people are born evil. We are born inherently evil. That's the idea of legalism. And Taoism doesn't really take a stand on the idea of people being born evil or good. It takes a stand on the idea of saying people are the way they are and you need to accept it. And once you learn how to accept it isn't the way people are, as well as just the way the world is, you'll better be able to navigate the world and be able to be happy. I'm doing more explanation on this one than the other two because Taoism is much more confusing, at least to a Westerner like me or you, usually to understand. Let's put it this way. Simplest way I can put Taoism is go with the flow. Just go with it, man. Just go with it. So, again, Confucianism, people are born inherently good. Legalism, people are born inherently evil. And Taoism, just go with it. Whatever it is, just go with it, accept it, and be okay. So, now look at the quotes with that explanation and see if you get those quotes a little bit better. The first one, talking about everything has its beauty. Saying everything is inherently good. It's up to you to see it or not. The second one, though, is talking about how if you don't have laws and orders put in place, evil people will do evil things unless you force them to be good. And then the third one is just basically saying, you know what? If you're going to put more laws up there, you're going to have more people break laws. So take away laws so you have less criminals. That's kind of a Taoist approach. And it's not saying it's good to take away laws or it's bad to put up laws. It's just saying, here's the consequences if you go one way or the other. Just understand that's what you're going to get. So, there's more to Taoism than just that. But those three quotes I felt like capture the sentiment of the main idea of all three of those philosophies pretty well. We're going to go into each one more in depth now. For the rest of this lesson, we're going to be going much more in depth into Confucianism. So, Confucius, around 500 BC or so, basically what we're saying, he's there towards the beginning to the middle of the Warring States period. So he comes onto the scene pretty quickly. Simply put, he brings it down to this idea that he just thinks that people have lost their ability to love and respect one another. If we could just get that back, we'd be good. If you remember my number one rule in the class, like really my only rule, the idea of following the golden rule, this is the guy who actually is quoted or has it recorded first ever saying that. Although, again, I'm pretty dang sure the golden rule has been around since time immemorial. Treat others the way you want to be treated. But basically, that's what Confucius is saying right there. So I'm looking at it as like, okay, how do we regain that? How do we regain that love and respect? Well, thinking that everybody is born inherently good, he then says, you know what? People just need to know their place. Once they know their place in any given certain situation, then we can learn what that true love and respect is again. And he actually spells it out, what knowing your place means. He comes up with what is called the 5 basic relationships, which you see there. And I need to give a bit of an explanation here. Each one of those relationships, you can be any one of those at any time. It doesn't mean that you'll always, like if you're a ruler, you might not always be a ruler. Maybe you yourself have a ruler, like a governor has like an emperor over him or something like that. Of course, there will be one guy at the top, and the one guy at the top is the emperor, which is what Confucius says needs to happen, that there needs to be an emperor, a leader who is above all and should be respected by all, in the end has the last say on everything. So that's the only person that's kind of the top of this relationship chain. If I'm losing you a little bit, just getting back to a little bit, what it's saying is in any situation where you can have a ruler and a subject, So someone who's considered a ruler and someone who's subject to that ruler, you need to know your place. Are you the ruler or are you the subject? If you're the ruler, you have the duty and responsibility to care for and love your subjects. See to their needs, make sure they're okay, make sure that they're kept safe and secure and things like that. If you're a subject, you have the duty and responsibility to obey your ruler and trust that the ruler has your best intentions in place, or what's best for you in place. But you need to be very obedient and respectful to your ruler in that case, irregardless. Maybe if you disagree with him, you need to just put your disagreements aside and say, I will do what you say. So that's ruler to subject. It's a very top-down relationship, what we call a vertical relationship, where one is definitely on top and someone else is definitely on bottom, and you just need to know your place. In fact, the next three, parent to child, husband to wife, old to young, are all vertical relationships. The only one on here that's a horizontal relationship is friend to friend, and I will explain that in a little bit. So, parent to child, though, same thing. Parents have the duty and responsibility to rear, love, provide for, and see to the safety and nourishment of their kids. Children have the responsibility to obey and do what their parents tell them to, knowing that their parents know what's best. And if you have any argument with them, you need to set it aside and know your place. Husband to wife, same thing. And this also counts towards the idea of men versus women as well, by the way. The husband or wife thing counts as men versus women in Chinese society. If you're the husband or the man in society, you need to and have the duty and responsibility to care for, look after, and provide for the life of your wife or the women in society, essentially to watch over, protect them, and help them. The women have the duty to be obedient to the men or the husbands in society. And again, if an argument comes up, if the husband's going to put down his foot, you just need to back off. I know a lot of people probably hearing me talk about this right now are probably getting a bit kind of ticked off, because that is not something we have in our culture. I will talk about that in a little bit. So, next one, old to young. This actually one is something we definitely have in our culture. If you're older than someone else, then you have the duty and responsibility to help out those that are younger, essentially impart of your wisdom and your experience to help them do better than you did type thing growing up. We hear that type of thing in our society all the time, and the same thing was true for as well. Respect your elders. If you're younger, you need to defer to those that are older. Now, the friend to friend is different. If you're in a friend to friend situation, it's the idea that, yeah, you can argue, you can play, one doesn't really have a thing over the other, like, hey, what should we play? Well, I'm older, we should play this. You don't bring that out when you're in a friend to friend situation. So, as long as you, according to Confucius, as long as you know your place, basically peace and harmony will abound, and love and respect will enter into everybody's life again, and everybody will kind of know how things work. But he also recognized that you need a lot of practice in getting there and kind of getting to this perfect society. So, but by the way, Confucianism, just getting ahead of the lesson or getting ahead of the unit or just history in general, this becomes the adopted philosophy of China for the next, well, not during his lifetime, but from the Han Dynasty on is the adopted philosophy of China for almost 2,000 years. And you could argue that it's still there today. Like, technically it ended in the early 1900s, but you can make an easy argument, and I personally could say I viewed this type of thinking and observed this type of idea in China. Because, well, if you look at some of it we just have everywhere. Parent to child, of course we have that. Ruler to subject, we do have that in a way as well. Husband to wife, that's when the world might get a little bit of arguments. And I'll give you some examples here. Well, actually what I'd like to do is I have to show some clips from Mulan, the cartoon Mulan, to give you some examples of that. And if I have some time, I might even put that up on Canvas for you to watch while I'm not able to be with you here. But hopefully I've explained these relationships well enough. So let me give you an example then. Let's say you have two friends playing in the backyard. In this case, it's a friend-to-friend relationship. However they're playing, one can't really have dominance over the other. It's a horizontal relationship. So, but then the mom of one of the kids, let's say, so kid one has his mom come out and says, hello, you guys need to do your homework right now. You haven't been doing your homework. So they both need to do their homework at that point for two different reasons. To kid two, who it's not his mom, she is older, and he needs to respect those who are older than him. For kid one, who that is his mom, well, that's both old. You could say it's old to young, but it's more important. That's parent to child. Now, let's say kid two's mom come over and says, you know what, you don't need to do that homework assignment. You don't need to do what the other mom just said. And kid two shouldn't do it then. So this is interesting because in one situation you have kid one who has to do his homework because parent one said it, and kid two doesn't have to do his homework because parent two said not to. And they're both actually knowing their place at that point, and you don't argue about it. You don't bring up, well, he doesn't have to. You don't bring up that question. You're getting out of your place if you do. Now, let's get to the point. Let's say that both parents say, yes, you need to do your homework. And let's say one of the friends is like, well, we should do it this way. Say kid two says we should do it this way, and kid one says, no, we have to do it this way. But let's say kid two is older than kid one. When it comes to this responsibility of getting your homework done, who did I say was older? Kid two? Kid one needs to defer to kid two, because even if it's like the matter of a month, you still defer. Anyways, when it comes down to it, the older kid has the decision. Now let's bring in, say, the teacher. Let's say I'm the teacher in this case, and I say, do your homework. The kids need to do that. In that case, that is a ruler to subject, meaning that if parent two told kid two not to do their homework, but I come in and say, yes, you have to do your homework, you listen to me. I am the ruler in that situation. I supersede the parent, because I have that on there in line on purpose. Anything that you're doing that's ruler to subject is more important than anything you do that's parent to child, which is more important than anything you do as husband to wife. That's more important than anything you do old to wife. That is all in sync. That is all that's not, I just didn't put them up here haphazardly. That's the way it's supposed to go. So ruler to subject will always supersede anything else. So basically, if I come in and say you have to do your homework, then both kids have to do it because I said so. And if their parents tell them no, too bad. Ruler to subject supersedes parent to child. Now, I'll give you this one last thing and then we'll be done with this lesson today. Let's say the principal comes in and says, no, you guys don't need to do your homework. Don't listen to Mr. Harrison. You guys are just fine. Then do they need to do their homework? No, they don't. Because the ruler of your ruler said no, and he's the more important ruler. I hope that, just let that sink in for a second. If we take this back to ancient China, it's saying something like, if a general or a governor says you need to do something like farm that land, and then the emperor says, no, you don't need to. Here's this land over here. You need to do that. You listen to the emperor because the head ruler, the one that's far up the line, is the more important. And we have that in our society as well, to some extent. But this was really, really held to within Chinese society once they adopt Confucius' teachings. So one more thing I do need to mention. No one in Confucius' lifetime adopted his thought process or his philosophy here. He actually died feeling like he was a major failure. If he would have lived 200 more years, or 200 to 300 more years, he would have seen his philosophy really take root and become the major thing of China. But that's how long it took after he died, about 250 years. Anyways, I'll leave it there, and I'll see you guys in the next lesson.